And the shadows grow long. This dusty trail is where I belong.
The Cowboys saved her from a ruthless gang and discovered they shared the same enemy, Bitter Springs, New Mexico territory. November 1882. The gunshot still echoed in the canyon when Silas Mercer hit the ground. For a moment, he didn't understand the shape of the world anymore. The sky tilted sideways, the rocks shuddered, and the desert air tasted like copper on his tongue. Then the pain came slow, at first, like something remembering it had teeth before exploding through his shoulder in a hot, tearing bloom. Blood spread beneath him, a dark flower blooming in the sand, its petals widening with every heartbeat he could feel slipping away. Above him, the sky burned copper and ash, the sun dying slow behind the mesa, as though the heavens themselves wanted to watch him go. He could hear the horses, his own men's horses, screaming somewhere in the smoke. A choked, panic sound that didn't belong to any living creature that understood mercy. He could smell burning canvas, burning flesh, burning everything he'd been hired to protect. The ambush had lasted less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes to erase 12 men. 12 good men who trusted him to lead them safe through Crow's Hollow Pass. Now, they lay scattered across the rocks like broken dolls, their blood mixing with the red earth until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The canyon swallowed their silence, the way a wolf swallows bone, quick, final, without remorse. Silas tried to move. His shoulders screamed. The bullet had gone clean through, but clean didn't mean painless. Clean didn't mean he'd survive the night. His vision flickered in and out, the world pulsing like a lantern flame fighting wind. A gust swept through the canyon, dragging sand over dead men's boots, carrying their last warmth away. Somewhere overhead, a crow called once sharp and impatient, as if annoyed he wasn't dead yet. 34 years old. He'd buried a wife and daughter 3 years ago, buried the last soft parts of himself with them. He had spent every day since then trying to find a reason to keep breathing. Now bleeding out in a nameless canyon, he finally understood he'd been looking in the wrong places. The weight of the locket beneath his shirt felt heavier than the rocks pinning his legs. He pressed his hand to it, or tried to, his fingers slick with his own blood. The metal was warm, almost alive, as if it remembered what he no longer had the strength to carry. The wind shifted again. Smoke thinned. The world darkened. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness dragged him under was a figure standing on the ridge above, watching, not moving to help, not moving to harm, just watching the way someone watches a fire that doesn't belong to them, but still burns too bright to ignore. No one had seen dead men before. She had seen her brother die with a railroad spike through his chest, the metal shining like a cruel star. She had seen her mother walk into the desert and never return, swallowed by heat and silence. She had seen her father's hands that once carved wooden horses for children go still and cold in her lap while soldiers burned their camp to ash in the distance. She knew what death looked like. This man had its shadow on his face. "Leave him," the voice inside her whispered. "He is white. He is enemy. He is not your burden." Her jaw tightened. The ridge wind lifted her braid behind her shoulder, carrying the scent of blood toward her like a warning. She should leave. Her people were scattered hunted. Every stranger was a risk. Every mercy a blade with two edges. But then the man spoke. Just one word, barely a breath, Emma. A name. A child's name. Soft and desperate on dying lips. Nolan's hand went to the turquoise beads at her throat. Her father had made the necklace for her when she was 7. He had told her the stones remember. When you forget who you are, hold them. They will remind you. The stones were warm now, under her fingertips, as if they too had heard the man's whisper. She looked down the slope again. Blood everywhere. Breath shallow. Hours from death, maybe less. The canyon dust clung to his lashes like frost. His lips were cracked, the wound at his shoulder still leaking slow, stubborn life. She thought of her brother, Ivanovi at 14, standing with a broken rifle against 6 armed men screaming for her to run. She had run. She had survived. And she had hated herself every day since. No, she said aloud to no one. Not again. The word hung in the air, like a defiance, like a prayer. She climbed down. The cave was half a mile from the canyon, hidden behind a waterfall that ran dry in summer, but still left enough moisture to keep the air cool. Nolan had found it 2 winters ago, after the last raid scattered what remained of her people like seeds in a storm. She lived here now, alone. The elders had gone north to join distant relatives. The young warriors had gone south to fight. She had stayed because this land held her family's bones, and she would not abandon them. Dragging the man took longer than she expected. He was heavy, tall, and broad-shouldered, built for labor, built for stubbornness. His clothes were trail-worn, but quality, and the gun at his hip was well-maintained. Not a drifter. Not a bandit. Something else, though she couldn't yet name it. He slipped in and out of consciousness as she hauled him across the rocks. Once he muttered something she didn't understand. Once he choked on his own breath, and she had to press her ear to his chest, make sure his heart still moved like a tired drum. Inside the cave, she laid him on the blankets she'd woven from yucca fiber. His wound still bled, but slower now. She cleaned it with water from her clay pot, then packed it with crushed sage and yarrow root, the way her grandmother had taught her, the way women had kept warriors alive, long before anyone drew maps of this land. He didn't wake. His fever climbed. His breathing hitched like a horse trying to outrun a pass that caught it anyway. Occasionally, he murmured again, names, fragments, ghosts. Gnawing kept him alive. For 3 days, she dripped water between his lips. She changed his bandages. She sang the old songs her mother used to sing, not because she believed they held power, but because the silence was too heavy to bear alone. Outside, the wind shifted seasons. Inside, firelight flickered across stone walls carved by forgotten rains. On the 3rd night, when the embers burned low, and she had begun to wonder whether she had saved a dying man, only to watch him die, slower, he opened his eyes. Silas woke to firelight and the smell of sage. For a moment, he thought he was dead. The pain in his shoulder disagreed. He tried to sit up. A hand pressed firmly against his chest, small but strong, and pushed him back down. Don't. A woman's voice, low, steady, accented in a way he recognized. Apache, you'll tear it open again. His vision blurred before clearing. She crouched beside him, backlit by the fire. Dark hair braided with strips of leather. Sun-browned skin. Eyes sharp enough to peel lies from a man's mouth before he spoke them. Where his throat cracked. She handed him a clay cup. Water cool and clean. He drank too fast, coughed, forced himself to slow. Safe, she said. For now. He looked around. A cave. Blankets. Drying herbs. Signs of someone who had survived alone far too long. You saved me. She didn't answer. Just watched him with that hawk gaze, the gaze of someone who had lost too much to trust too quickly. Why? He asked. Still nothing. She moved to the fire, stirred something in a small pot. The smell hit him meat herb smoke. His stomach tightened with hunger he hadn't felt in days. You said a name, she finally said. When you were dying. Emma. Silas's hand went to his chest. The locket was still there. Relief cracked something inside him. My daughter, he said. She died 3 years ago. Nolan ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to him. Her movements were careful, deliberate, a woman used to tending wounds that weren't hers to heal. I had a brother, she said. Anavi. He was 14. She didn't offer more. She didn't need to. Some losses were too large for language. They lived in the bones, in the breaths, in the quiet between two people who recognized the same hollow ache inside each other. Silas swallowed hard. I'm Silas, he said softly. Silas Mercer. The fire cracked once, sending sparks upward like small, stubborn stars. Nolan met his eyes. You are alive, she said simply. Not a kindness. Not a promise. Just a fact to be carried forward or wasted. He nodded. For the first time in 3 years, the fact felt like something he might want to keep. Nolan. She sat across from him, the fire between them, its light painting her features in shifting copper. Eat. Then sleep. We'll talk when you're stronger. He ate. The stew was simple rabbit wild onion, the bitterness of some root he couldn't name, but it tasted like something pulled from another life. A life before smoke and gunfire. Before blood filled his mouth and grief turned the world to ash. Or maybe anything tasted good when you'd stared death in the face and watched it hesitate. When he finished, she took the bowl without a word and stepped outside. He heard the splash of water against stone. The cave breathed around him, quiet, old, patient. The fire cracked and spit tiny sparks that glowed like fireflies before dying. His eyes grew heavy, but he fought it, not wanting the world to tilt away from him again. Not yet. The darkness had teeth, and he wasn't ready to let it bite. Just before sleep dragged him under, he heard her voice, soft, distant singing, something in a language he didn't understand. But he understood the shape of it. It sounded like grief. It sounded like prayer. It sounded like home, or the memory of one. 4 days passed. Silas grew stronger, though strength came slowly wrapped in pain. Each movement burned like rusted metal, scraping bone, but the burn meant he was alive. Nolan remained distant present, but unreachable, like a mountain you could see every day but never climb. She fed him with the precision of someone performing a duty, not offering kindness. She changed his bandages with steady hands that did not tremble. She answered his questions with as few words as possible, as if every syllable cost her something she couldn't afford. He learned small things about her details that revealed themselves without permission. She gathered roots in the morning, checked snares at dusk, sang occasionally when she thought he was asleep, and sometimes, when the cave was quiet and she thought he wasn't watching, she pressed her palm to the earth and murmured something low and reverent. "What are you saying?" he asked once. "When you touch the ground like that." She looked at him for a long moment, assessing whether the truth mattered. "Greeting," she said. "My people believe the earth is our first mother. We greet her each morning the way you greet family." He thought about that. About family. About graves. "Can you teach me?" he asked. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Why would you want to learn?" Silas held her gaze. "Because you saved my life. And I want to understand the person who thought I was worth saving." Something shifted in her expression, not softness. No, Nayland wasn't shaped from soft things, but something close to acceptance. Recognition. A glimmer of shared humanity beneath years of hurt. "Tomorrow," she said, "if you're well enough to walk." The next morning, she led him outside. The world opened wide, mesa and sky, and endless red earth stretching in every direction, like a land still deciding whether it wanted to remember or forget. The air tasted like dust and juniper. The wind whispered through the scrub brush, carrying secrets across the desert floor. Nolan knelt, pressed both palms to the ground. "First, you feel," she said, "the warmth of the sun and the rock, the cold beneath where water sleeps, the bones of those who walked before." Silas knelt beside her. The stone was warm under his hands, heat pulsing slow and steady like the earth's heartbeat. He closed his eyes, allowed the silence to settle into him. "Now you speak," she said, not with words, with breath. "You give your air to the earth. The earth gives its strength to you." He exhaled slowly. The wind picked up swirling dust around them in a small dance. Probably coincidence, but it felt like something else. Something watching. Something answering. "Good," Nayland murmured. She stood and brushed dirt from her knees. "You learn faster than most white men." "I've had practice learning from people smarter than me." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile, the ghost of one. It vanished quickly, but he saw it. And it was the first truly human crack in the armor she wore. That night, he told her about the ambush. They sat by the fire, the space between them, small but still thick with unspoken boundaries. Stars glittered outside the cave, mouth sharp enough to cut. The firelight played across Nayland's hands as she wove strips of yucca into rope, her movement steady and rhythmic. "We were escorting supplies," Silas said. "Medicine mostly. Some tools. The company hired us to get it through to the mining camps." "Which company?" "Pacific Western Railroad." Nayland's hands stopped. The yucca strips sagged between her fingers. "Say that again." Silas glanced up. "Pacific Western Railroad. They're building a line through. I know what they're building." Her voice was different now, cold, rigid, carved from stone. "I know exactly what they're building." She set the rope aside, reached into a leather pouch at her hip, pulled out something small and metallic, a brass button, and tossed it across the fire. It landed near his knee with a soft clink. Silas picked it up. Brass, stamped with an eagle clutching railroad tracks. The Pacific Western logo. He looked up sharply. Where did you get this from the man who killed my brother? Nolan's eyes burned. He wore a uniform. Blue coat, brass buttons. He laughed while Anavi bled. Silas felt the world tilt. He reached into his own pocket slowly, as if afraid of the truth he might touch, and pulled out the brass casing he'd found in his saddlebag before collapsing. Same eagle. Same tracks. The men who ambushed us, he said slowly. They wore the same uniform. I thought they were outlaws dressed up to cause confusion. But he looked at Nalan. They were company men. Official. Virgil Crane. She spoke the name like poison. He commands their security forces. He ordered the raid on my village. He gave the order to burn everything. The name punched the air from Silas's lungs. Crane, he whispered. Virgil Crane. You know him? Nolan asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. Silas's hand shook. He hadn't said Crane's name in 3 years, not out loud, not even in the dark where no one could hear. Because saying it would mean facing the truth he'd buried deep enough to rot. He killed my wife, Silas said. My daughter. 3 years ago, in a town called Miller's Creek. The railroad wanted the land. The people wouldn't sell. He swallowed, voice raw. Crane made them pay for refusing. Silence unfolded, slow, heavy binding. Then Nolan reached across the fire and placed her hand over his. Her palm was rough, with calluses, warm from the flames. It grounded him, anchored him. The same enemy, she said quietly. The same wound. He looked at her, really looked. The scars on her arms. The turquoise beads at her throat. The fierceness in her eyes, shaped by loss, grief, rage. And he realized her pain wasn't just parallel to his. It was a continuation of it. If I find him, Silas said, voice steadying, I'm going to kill him. No. Nolan's grip tightened. We are going to kill him. The days blurred together. They trained. Silas taught Nolan to shoot his rifle. She learned fast, almost too fast, her posture clean, her breathing quiet, her aim frighteningly steady. When she fired, she did it without hesitation, without apology. She taught him how to move through the desert without leaving tracks, how to read wind-scuffed sand, how to recognize the faint shine of a seep where water hid, how to let the land swallow you when danger approached. At dusk, they practiced tracking. At dawn, they practiced silence. They spoke little. They understood much. Every day, the distance between them shrank by a fraction never spoken, never acknowledged, but undeniable. Two people shaped by the same violence. Two fates bent by the same hand. Two wounded souls turning slowly toward the same fire. And somewhere between the lessons, between the shared glances, between the breath and dust and silence, something dangerous began to grow. Not softness, not love, not yet, but alliance, purpose, a promise forged in ash and fire. a promise with a name, Virgil Crane, and the certainty that when they finally found him, they would not leave him breathing. They talked less than he expected, but the silences between them grew comfortable, not the brittle, fragile kind shared by strangers, but the grounded sort that formed only when two people were pointed toward the same horizon. Their quiet held purpose. And purpose, Silas realized, was sometimes warmer than conversation. One afternoon, while Silas cleaned his gun, Nayland sat beside him and began to sing. It was the kind of melody that wrapped itself around the bones. A haunting minor key lament, slow and mournful, rising and falling like a long, tired breath. It filled the cave in a way the fire never could. "What song is that?" he asked softly. "A mourning song." She didn't stop weaving as she spoke, her fingers dancing over the fibers with practiced ease. "For those we've lost. We sing so they know they aren't forgotten." "It's beautiful," Silas murmured. "It's sad," she corrected, her dark eyes lifting to meet his. "In my language, all beautiful things are sad. Beauty means something that will not last." He held the thought like a thorn between his fingers, painful but honest. He thought of how his wife's laugh had faded from memory like a lantern flame dying in a draught. How his daughter's tiny hands, hands that once fit perfectly inside his, had become more dream than memory. How the world had taken and taken and taken until beauty felt like a trick played by the universe. But he also thought of the new beauty in front of him, a woman shaped by loss, singing a song, steeped in pain and love equally. Something fleeting, something fragile, something real. "Teach me," he said. She raised an eyebrow, amused, or maybe surprised. "The song, all of it," he said quietly. "Everything you're willing to share." She studied him the way she had the night he woke in her cave, measuring the weight of his sincerity, the risk of offering him anything more than necessity. Then she began again, from the beginning, slower this time, breaking the melody into fragments so he could repeat them. He mangled every word. His tongue tripped over unfamiliar sounds. She corrected him without mockery, her steady tone guiding him more gently than her expression suggested she was capable of. By sundown, he could stumble through the first verse without entirely butchering it. "You learn faster than most white men," she said again, gathering her tools. "You said that before. It's still true." She stood, stretching the last gold light outlining her against the cave entrance, like a carving in sandstone. "Rest now," she said. "Tomorrow we plan." The plan was simple. Crane's men would return. They always did. The Pacific Western Railroad couldn't afford witnesses or complications. And Silas Mercer, bleeding survivor of their ambush, was both. When they came, he and Nolan would be ready. But the waiting, that was the hardest part. They reinforced the cave entrance with stacked stones. Nolan showed him narrow paths hidden beneath scrub brush and where the canyon walls funneled sound. They set traps, some simple pitfalls, others more cruel, the kind only a hunter who had lived alone for years could have devised. By the second day, they had 2 fallback positions. By the third, they had memorized each other's movements. Nolan knew the land better than any map. Silas knew how company men thought, how they hunted, how they killed. Together, they built something that might survive a storm of bullets. But night was a different enemy. When the fire burned low and the canyon wind whispered against stone fear, crept close enough to touch. On one such night, Silas asked, "Are you scared Nellen didn't lie?" She didn't know how. "Fear is useful," she said. "It keeps you sharp. But I won't let it stop me." "Stop you from what? From finishing this?" She touched the turquoise beads at her throat, turning them gently between her fingers. "My father gave me these," she said, "a week before he died. He said they carried the memories of our family, everyone who walked before us, and everyone who would walk after." Her voice softened. "If I die without children, the memories end with me." "You won't die," Silas said. "You can't promise that." "No." He shifted closer until their knees almost touched. "But I can promise I'll do everything possible to keep you alive." She looked at him fully, then without anger, without armor, without the distance she'd maintained like a shield. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you saved me." He reached out slow, measured, giving her a chance to refuse him. She didn't. His fingers brushed the beads at her throat. Her hand lifted to cover his. They stayed like that, bound by touch, by grief, by a strange, fragile tether neither of them could name. For the first time since his daughter's death, Silas felt the faintest spark of something he thought he'd buried forever: hope. They came 3 days later. Silas heard the horses' first hoofbeats echoing through the tight canyon walls, growing louder. 7 riders, he counted. Maybe 8. Too many for a straight fight. But that wasn't the plan. "Positions?" Nayland whispered. She vanished into the rocks, her body merging with shadow and stone. Silas positioned himself near the cave entrance rifle, steady. His shoulder throbbed pain, flaring with each breath, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was alive. Pain meant he had something to finish. The riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon, dust rising around their horses' legs like smoke. Company uniforms, blue coats, brass buttons shining like mockery. And at their front, on a magnificent black stallion, Virgil Crane. Silas's heartbeat slowed. Time itself seemed to stretch thin. Crane was older now, his hair threaded with gray, but the eyes, cold, metallic, dead inside, were exactly the same as the day he burned Miller's Creek. "Mercer." Crane's voice thundered against the canyon walls, rolling through the ravine like distant storm fire. "I know you're here. My tracker found your blood a mile back." Silas didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't dare let a single pebble shift beneath his boots. He simply watched, waited, letting Crane's men step deeper into the kill zone he and Nalin had carved out of stone and instinct. "You've caused me considerable trouble," Crane continued, turning his horse in a slow circle as his eyes scanned the jagged rocks. "The board's unhappy about losing that shipment. And losing 12 men. A thin smile tugged at his mouth, cold, reptilian. "Though I suppose I should thank you," he added. Fewer witnesses. The riders fanned out like a net being cast. Horses snorted, hooves scraping against loose shale. The canyon air tightened. One rider passed directly over a covered pit. The ground creaked sun-baked dirt, sagging, but it held. "For now, I'll make you a deal," Crane called, lifting his voice. "Come out now, and I'll make it quick." Keep hiding, his tone sharpened, venom sliding in. "And I'll make it slow. For you and whoever's been keeping you alive." Silas's finger tightened on the trigger weight. Nolan's voice drifted through his memory like a breath of desert wind. Patience. 3 riders moved toward the waterfall, unaware of the dead ground beneath them. 2 circled east, trying to flank the rocks. Crane hung back. Of course he did, shielded by his men, a coward wrapped in command and polished brass. Then the first trap triggered. The earth gave way with a deep cracking groan. A horse screamed, panicked, high-pitched, and then vanished as the pit swallowed both animal and rider whole. Dust exploded upward in a choking cloud. Before the echo even finished bouncing off the walls, Nalen's arrow sliced through the air. A high, sharp whistle. Then impact. Her arrow buried into a second rider's throat. He jerked once, toppled from the saddle, and hit the ground without a sound. Silas fired. His first shot slammed into a third man's chest, knocking him backward off his horse. His second shot ricocheted off the rocks near Crane's stallion, sending the animal rearing hooves, lashing the air. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked. Stone shattered. Horses screamed. And the canyon, silent for centuries, roared to life with violence. Gunfire crackled against stone. Bullets ricocheted like angry insects. Silas ducked behind a boulder, rolled. Fired again, another rider fell. 2 remained. 2 and Crane. Nolan appeared on the high ridge bow, drawn silhouette, sharp against the sun, and released another arrow. It hit a rider in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The man didn't rise. 1 left. But Crane wasn't fighting. He was turning his stallion, retreating, spurring the animal hard toward the canyon mouth. Running. Just like the coward he had always been. And Silas knew this was the moment everything had led to. The moment that would decide whether his family's ghosts finally slept or screamed forever. "He's mine," Silas shouted. The words tore out of him like they'd been caged too long. He broke from cover, sprinting across open ground, boots sliding on loose gravel, breath coming in sharp knives. It was a stupid move. Reckless. Exactly the kind of thing men did when they stopped caring about staying alive. But Silas wasn't running for survival. He was running for retribution. 3 years of rage, slow burning, venomous, patient, as winter frost ignited all at once. It roared through him like wildfire racing up dry canyon grass. And now that it finally had direction, nothing was going to stop him. A rider wheeled toward him, pistol raised. Silas didn't even break stride. He fired once, felt the rifle slam into his wounded shoulder. A hot flare of agony shot down his arm. Didn't matter. The rider toppled from the saddle, dust blooming around him. 1 left. Just Crane. The canyon mouth loomed ahead, jagged rocks, turning the sunlight into shards. Crane's horse scrambled up the slope, struggling on loose stone. Silas pushed harder, lungs burning like he'd inhaled fire, legs screaming for mercy. But mercy wasn't something he dealt in anymore. He wasn't going to make it. Crane was going to escape. Again. The thought hit him harder than the bullet had. Another failure. Another ghost added to the long list he already carried. Then an arrow hissed past his ear, so close he felt its wind. It hit Crane's horse in the flank. The animal shrieked, reared violently, and Crane was flung like a rag doll across the sandstone. He hit the ground hard, rolled dust exploding around him. His pistol clattered away. Crane scrambled after it, on hands and knees, bleeding desperate, all dignity gone. Silas reached him first. He kicked the pistol aside. Then he pressed the rifle barrel against Crane's forehead, forcing his head back into the dirt. The man who had taken everything from him, his wife, his daughter, his future, lay helpless at his feet. Bleeding. Cornered. Finally, at his mercy. "Please," Crane gasped. His voice shook like cold metal. "I can pay you. Whatever you want." Silas's voice came out raw, torn from a deeper place than his throat. "Can you bring back my wife?" Crane swallowed. Silas, listen. My daughter," his voice cracked. "She was 5. Can you bring her back?" "I didn't know," Crane babbled. "The raid on Miller's Creek wasn't personal. It was business," Silas spat. He laughed, a sound jagged and broken. "You killed a 5-year-old girl and called it business." Footsteps behind him, soft, controlled. Nolan, emerging from the rock's arrow, still knocked eyes sharp as obsidian. "And her people," Silas said, voice shaking with fury he could barely contain. "The village you burned, her brother, 14 years old, was that business?" To Crane's gaze flicked to Nolan. Recognition sparked, then calculation twisted and frantic. "The Apache girl," he breathed. "She's the one who escaped. The railroad's been looking for her for months. There's a bounty." "Shut up." $2,000 Crane pressed. "Help me get back to the company, and it's yours. All of it. You can start over. Buy a new life." Silas's finger curled tighter on the trigger. The barrel dug into Crane's skin. Everything inside him screamed for blood. To end this. To make the world right again with one pull of a trigger. "But then don't." Nolan's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through him like a cold blade. He turned. She stood a few feet away, bow lowered now, but her eyes locked onto his. "If you kill him like this," she said softly, helpless, begging you become what he is. "He doesn't deserve mercy," Silas growled. "No," she agreed, stepping closer. "He doesn't. But you do." Silas stared at her. At the scars on her arms. At the grief hollowed into the lines around her eyes. At everything she had lost because of this man. Because of men like him. He saw himself reflected in her gaze, broken, furious, trembling on the brink of becoming something he'd hate. "The memories of your wife and daughter," she whispered, "deserve better than a killing done in rage." His hand shook. Slowly, painfully, the rifle lowered. "Get up," Silas said. Crane looked stunned, like he couldn't believe he'd survived the moment. "Get up," Silas repeated, grabbing him by the collar. Crane stumbled to his feet. "You're going to answer for what you've done." "In a court." "In front of everyone." Silas's grip tightened. "The whole territory is going to know what Pacific Western Railroad really is." Crane's lip curled. "You think anyone will believe you, an ex-soldier and a savage girl, against the most powerful company in the West? Maybe not," Silas said. He hauled Crane forward, dragging him like a sack of grain. "But we're going to try anyway." They delivered Crane to the marshal in Bitter Springs. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of testimony. 3 weeks of old wounds ripped open. 3 weeks of people emerging from nowhere, farmers burned out of their homes, miners beaten by company men families, displaced by railroad greed. Silas testified. Nolan testified. Others followed one after another, their stories laying bare the empire of violence Crane had built. Pacific Western Railroad sent lawyers, slick-polished men who spoke like snakes wrapped in silk. They argued, denied, deflected. But the truth piled up faster than their lies could cover it. Virgil Crane was sentenced to hang. He was executed on a Tuesday morning under a sky the color of copper and blood. Crowds gathered. Newspapers took notes. Justice, rare and imperfect, arrived in the desert like a tired traveler. Silas didn't watch. He'd buried enough souls. Crane didn't deserve a place among them. The day after the hanging, Nayland found him at the edge of town. He stood, looking at the mountains, their red cliffs catching the late sunlight, sharp and lonely. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know where I belong anymore," Silas admitted. "For 3 years, revenge was all I had. Now that it's done now," she said gently, "you need something else to live for." Silas nodded. Nolan reached up and untied the turquoise beads from her throat. The necklace her father had made. The one she guarded more fiercely than her own breath. "These belong to my people," she said. "To everyone who came before me." She pressed the beads into his palm, closing his fingers around them. "But you," her voice softened. "You feel like my people now." Silas's breath caught. The necklace glowed warm from her skin. A piece of history. A piece of her. "I can't take this," he whispered. "You can return it," she said. "When you're ready." He understood. Not goodbye. Just not yet. "Where will you go?" he asked. "North," she said. "There are others like me, scattered afraid. Someone needs to find them. Someone needs to remind them who we are." That sounds dangerous. Everything is dangerous. A small, wry smile touched her lips. "I thought you knew that by now." He laughed, a real warm sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. "I could come with you," he said quietly. "Help you find them." "You could." She studied him carefully. "But first you need to find yourself. The man you were before the grief, he's still in there somewhere." He swallowed. She was right. He hated that she was right. "How will I find you?" he asked. "When I'm ready." Nayland pointed toward the distant peaks. "Follow the old trails," she said. "Ask for the woman who speaks to the earth. Someone will know." She turned to leave. Silas reached out and caught her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for saving me, for everything." "Don't thank me yet." She squeezed his fingers firm and warm. "This story isn't finished. It's just she searched for the right word. Beginning." Then she walked toward the horizon, the rising sun framing her silhouette like something out of a legend, real and unreal all at once. Silas watched until she disappeared behind the ridge. Then he looked down at the turquoise beads in his hand. Their weight was small, but it felt like holding an entire world, his and the one they might someday build together. He pressed his palm against the earth, not lightly, not as a gesture done out of habit, but with the weight of everything he had been and everything he was still trying to become. The ground was cool beneath his skin, cooler than the air, as if keeping secrets the sun hadn't warmed yet. He breathed out slowly, long, steady, deliberate greeting the morning the way she'd taught him. For the first time, the ritual didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. The wind picked up, slipping through the juniper brush and stirring the dust in small spirals. It carried the smell of sage and something else, something faint and fragile that made his chest tighten. Hope. Or the first shape of it. Silas lifted his head. The world stretched wide before him, mesas painted gold by sunrise, ridges that cut the horizon like blades, and the long northern trails snaking into lands he'd never walked. Somewhere beyond those ridges, she was moving quiet steps, sure steps, the kind of steps made by someone who belonged to the land more than she ever belonged to a town. He would find her again. He didn't know when or how, but the certainty settled into him like a stone finding its place in a riverbed. Some truths didn't need maps or directions. They were known in the bones. Known the way men knew the sun would rise, the way empty hearts recognized the echo of someone who had once filled them. Some stories didn't end with vengeance. Some stories weren't endings at all. They were beginnings disguised as ruin. He had spent 3 years living for the dead, chasing ghosts, feeding his grief like a starving dog, letting rage carve him into something small and sharp. But now, the echoes of gunfire had faded. The man who had destroyed his life was gone. The road in front of him was no longer paved with blood. Maybe it was time to start living for the living. A gust of wind swept across the plain, tugging gently at his coat. The turquoise beads at his chest shifted with the motion, pressing lightly against his skin, warm despite the morning chill, as if the memory they carried had its own heartbeat. He touched them once, reverently. They weren't just a gift. They were a promise. A path to return to when he was ready. Silas Mercer stood slow, steady, deliberate, as though rising from the earth itself. The ache in his shoulder reminded him he was still healing, but healing was a kind of direction too. He tightened his grip on the strap of his pack, took one long look at the mountains to the north, and began walking. Not fast. Not running. Just moving, one step at a time, toward a life that might still want him. The sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls behind him in copper and gold. Birds scattered overhead. Somewhere far off, a lone horse whinnied. The world felt large again, dangerous, yes, but not empty. And so ends another tale from the Wild West. A story of dust and danger, of grief carved deep into the bone, and grace found in the unlikeliest places. A story of 2 wounded souls who met in the wasteland and proved that sometimes the deepest cowboy love stories aren't about riding into the sunset together. Sometimes they're about learning to ride at all. If these Wild West stories touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. More tales of Wild West love are coming soon. Stories of those who fought those who fell and those who found their way home. THEEMD